In the last vignettes, we had been talking about the visible signs of the Catholic Church. We mentioned the fact that Christ wanted us to find out immediately which is the true church, and therefore He made it a point that His church has visible signs. We had seen some of those signs, and the last one we saw was the fact that Christ Himself said that His church would be made up of wheat and cockle. And so one of the visible signs of the true church of Christ is that it is made up more of bad people than good people. Aside from the parable of the cockle and the wheat, there is another parable that illustrates the fact that Holy Mother the Church has both bad and good members. And this is the parable of the good fishes and the bad fishes that were caught in the net. Now at this point, let me make a little note. You see, there were two parables about the bad fishes and the fishes in the net. In the first parable, the net had both bad and good fishes, but in the second parable, there were only good fishes. This parable about the good fishes in the net was mentioned by Christ sometimes near His resurrection. Now the message is quite clear, the fact that as long as the end of the world is not yet approaching, the Catholic Church would always be made up of more bad people and very little good people. But when the end of the world is near, because the Church is bound to be the bride of Christ, now, Christ wouldn't want any bad person among His bride. And so before the bridegroom receives the bride, Christ will remove all the cockles. That's the reason why in the second parable there were only good fishes in the net. Now, how can we detect the true church by means of this visible sign? We had seen that in the first signs that we had given, it was quite obvious that our Catholic Church is not very clearly seen as the Church of Christ, because the sign seems not to apply to her. Now maybe this sign will apply this time. The fact that the Church always has many bad members, many cockles, and little wheat. Well, if we look at our church and the members of our church, you would notice that really we have so many cockles. But then, aside from the cockles, we have to find the wheat. So where is the wheat? In spite of the fact that the Catholic Church has so many bad people, you can always see through the cockle and find the wheat. A very good example of this are the great converts that we had just some years ago, like Newman, John Newman, who became later on a Catholic priest and a cardinal. There is Reverend Monsignor Ronald Knox and Benson, Hugh Benson. Now, these three were converts from Anglicanism, a form of Protestantism. Some of them were even children of Anglican bishops. They lived at a time when the church was quite, corrupt, shall we say. But the Church of England, the Catholic Church in England, was not so bad. And so even if these converts saw the cockles, they saw through the cockles and discovered the wheat. And seeing precisely that this church had cockles and wheat, they were converted to the Catholic Church because they were certain that this was the Church of Christ. The danger that always beset the Catholic Church is that there is always a group within the Church who would like to be the chosen few, the elect. And so what happens is that they begin to organize themselves within the Catholic Church as if they were the chosen few. Now, the moment you start a group within the Catholic Church, you begin to build a church within the church. And that is impossible. That cannot be. It all started with the Corinthians, and then came the Montanists, then the Donatists, up to the time of John Calvin. You see, the concept of all these people and most of the Christian sect is this, that theirs is the exclusive religion of the ones who are saved. They are all saints. They cannot commit sin, and all of them are destined to go to heaven. I'm sure you have heard this offer often, that if you join this group, you surely will go to heaven. Now, if all of them will go to heaven, they definitely are not showing the sign of the true Church of Christ, because they claim that they are a church of saints, and that is not the way Christ painted His true church. Now, how can we know that people belong to the wheat part rather than the cockles? Well, some of the few signs, and we shall give more later on, are the wheat are people who love corrections. And secondly, they deny themselves from all the things that they want. And they constantly mortify their senses, sort of killing the desires of their senses, and impose upon themselves silence and solitude. And their life, their total life, is like a campaign against all their prevailing passions. Sometimes it is so difficult to find the true church because there is so much weeds, so much cockle, that it is quite difficult to find where the wheat is. Well, the wheat is always subdued. They live secret and silent life. That is why it's so hard to find the wheat among the cockles. While the weeds and the cockles are always boisterous in their presence. It is said that the Blessed Virgin Mary lived and died quietly and secretly. And so when she died, the whole of Jerusalem did not even know it. But when Judas hung himself, all Jerusalem knew about it. And so when looking for the true Church of Christ, we might find it covered with cockles. But it is only the one who is truly seeking for the true church who will discover the wheat among the cockles. And the moment you discover the wheat, you can be sure this is the church of Christ, because there are cockles and there are wheat. As we have seen in the last vignette, Christ came to earth to call out a group of people, a small number, to make up His church. Now, if you notice, the word we use is call out of the world. And we mentioned the fact that this call out means ecclesia. The term to describe it is ecclesia. So ecclesia is the church that God took out from the world. Now, if you will notice, most of the Catholics had not even left the world. They are still in the world, indulging in the world, and enmeshed in the world. So most of them do not even make up the many that has been called out of the world. It is this many that Christ called out that He will get a few to be His chosen one. And this few we call elect. They are different from the church, the ecclesia. These ones are the elect. Now, let us go deeper into these teachings of Christ. You will notice that St. Paul worked so hard, not in order to improve society, not in order to save the ecosystem, not in order to bring some economic stability in the land. St. Paul was working so hard for the sake of the elect. He was not working for the many that were called out of the world. He was working simply for the elect. Now, putting it in other words, he was not working definitely for the cockle. He was working not even for the wheat, which represents the many, but he was working simply from the few of the wheat, from the few number of the wheat. So Jesus Christ also, when He came to earth, did not come to save all mankind, but also only the elect. And the Catholic Church was established for the purpose of the elect. In the next vignette, we shall discuss this a little deeper. God bless you.